Today, in the Greenway Ballroom, that's where you're at right now, the session today right now is an insider's look at APU. And our presenter is Sal Soghoian. Sal is a world-renowned user automation expert, software developer, author, and jazz musician, most known for his 2 decades as product manager of automation technologies at Apple Incorporated, where he advanced AppleScript, Automator, JavaScript for automation, system services, the terminal, Apple Configurator, and other Mac OS automation tools. And I'd just like to say a personal thank you for working on those. Great work. We love them. Yes. He's also the purveyor of all things automation at macosxautomation.com. Today, Sal will be talking to us about the APU, or the Apple Provisioning Utility, and how it delivers robust on-site management of mobile devices. Take it away, Sal.
Thank you. And first of all, thank you to the Jamf family for having me here again. I really appreciate it. With the ceiling here like this is, I feel like I'm in that, there's always a cool family in the neighborhood, and all the kids hang out at their house, and they have a refinished basement. Well, I feel like I'm in the refinished basement with like paneling here, the low ceilings and everything. My name's Sal Soghoian, and as the introduction said, I've been involved in automation. It's a core tenet of my life that the power of the computer should reside in the hands of the one using it. And I've always thought that that was a principle worth keeping in mind as we develop software. And today, we're going to look at an extension of what I was talking about last year. Last year here at Jamf was my first time, and I talked about how you could use Apple Configurator and Automator and a little bit of coding and set up your own system for formatting or refreshing iOS devices by just connecting them to the Mac. The act of attachment alone would trigger an entire automated setup process. And I talked in detail about how you do that. And this year, I'm going to take that to the next step and talk about the Apple Provisioning Utility and how that carries on those principles to a whole different level. And while I'm doing that, I was thinking about the topic of what I would be talking about this year, and I got so distracted in my mind by what is going on in the world. It just seemed like turmoil, turbulence, all the T's were happening at once. And not just in one aspect of life, but in all aspects of life. And it got me thinking about why that is and how that relates to what we do. Because everything is intertwined. We all know that. You can't change one thing without changing the other. It's all intertwined, and it got me looking at that and how that affects the whole idea behind how computers came about, where they're going, and how they're managed. So bear with me a second. So I found this picture, and I looked at this. It's by Nirmal Persia. I hope I got his name right. He's a renowned mountaineer. He's climbed 6 of the highest peaks in the world in 1 month. An incredible individual. And he took this photo here, and this is not guys waiting to get the new iPhone. This is on top of Mount Everest. These people are at 28,000 feet, lined up to try to hit the summit of Mount Everest. Now, it's important to note that there's this thing called the death zone. Once your human body gets to 26,000 feet, whether you're breathing oxygen or not, your body starts dying. It starts shutting down because it just can't exist at that altitude. And in order to be at this, where they are right now at this time of day, they had to reach a Camp 4 the night before and stay there. So they've been at 26,000 feet or more for over 24 hours. And they're lined up here, bumper to bumper, trying to get up to Mount Everest. And I saw this picture and I said, wow, what drives people to do that? What is going on? because the standard protocol at that height and where they are is if you have a problem and you like fall down or your equipment's broken or you break a leg or something, everybody walks around you because they don't have the energy to actually help you. So you're putting yourself at profound risk here. And it got me thinking about, well, why is this occurring? What's going on in the world that this is occurring at Mount Everest? So I decided, well, I need some perspective on this thing. And I've always had this formula that I use when I need to figure out the big picture about something. And it's this: insight is gained through the application of perspective over time. And I've used this formula my whole life to try to get an idea of what's going on behind something that appears to be obvious. And so let's use that formula now and kind of look at that. So here's a picture of our Earth, and we're about right there in the middle of all that cloud look that's outside. And this picture is possible because of work by NASA. NASA has a deep space climate observatory satellite. And on that satellite is a camera, and it's about 1 million miles away from the Earth, and it can take these incredible pictures of it. And to get that kind of perspective, NASA has positioned the satellite so that it's exactly 1 million miles away from Earth, following the same orbit as the Earth, with the sun to its back. So every shot that it takes and every observation it makes, the Earth is fully lit. And they actually have a website. You can go to this website and type in a date and download the pictures for that date. And I said, okay, well, why don't I do that? And I'm going to pick a certain period of time and see what it looks like. So I downloaded a bunch of pictures for a couple weeks this year, because I wanted to see what was going on with Europe. There was all this stuff. Europe was in the news. Suddenly, Europe dominated our news cycle. And I wanted to see, why was all this happening? What did it look like? What was causing this kind of change? Because they had profound changes in their climate with heat, fires, in places they never had before. And they had tornadoes. The temperature hit over 100 degrees in Paris. And all of this followed this weird winter that they had just the season before. And so this was happening this year. And what that told me is that by looking at that, I could tell that there was profound change going on. And with profound structural change in the world, everything gets affected, as I said before. Society gets affected, economies get affected, businesses get affected, and every aspect of the world changes. And we've been undergoing profound change for quite a while now. And we can see how this change affects different things about life. For example, cars. Here's something to think about. So cars are really important to Americans. Americans have a love affair with cars that has been going on for quite a while. But cars really started off as like these utilitarian kind of vehicle thing, boxes, right? And if you had a lot of money, you could have like a very fancy car. But, basically they were these utilitarian things that took you from point A to point B. And occasionally there'd be some kind of feature like this 4-door that would be an improvement of some kind. But at some point, the companies realized that, we're not going to sell a lot of these things based on this has got 4 doors and that has 2, because everybody can do that. They needed to find another way to start selling more vehicles to Americans. What they did is they started putting personality into the cars. And the cars started becoming an expression of your individuality. It's an extension of you and your accomplishments and who you are and the inside. And it kept getting more grandiose as time went on. And we had an interstate system, and they introduced the concept of the open road, where you were in this vehicle that was an extension of who you are, and you're out on the freedom of the open road. And it was every guy's dream to be in a convertible with his partner headed down the open road. And that's what the formula was for selling this concept to us to get us to buy these cars. And you'd think that even with the new introduction of electric vehicles that have sensors, intelligence, all kinds of other aspects of this vehicle, that they would talk about those in trying to show you what those cars do. But they rely basically on the same kind of ideas that they always did about, coolness, where, you're zipping down a country road. Now you're out on the concrete of someplace, who knows, you're spinning back and forth with this guy here, and you both zoom off into the distance with the city there, and it guts to the sky. Well, the reality is that was San Francisco. That was the thing that was in the background off there that they were headed to. And across the bay from San Francisco is a place called Alameda, and they have an airstrip there. And they filmed some of the things there, but the last couple shots were filmed on the airstrip headed down right to the city. We've been trained to think of these tools and these objects as personalized things, personalized extensions of us. Here's another example. Right across the bay, Ford filmed this commercial. Now, this is for the new Bullitt car, based on the movie Bullitt with Steve McQueen. And this is an extension of that car that they had in there. And you can feel the sound. I mean, the reptilian brain inside of you, you can't help it, man. How can you not want that? How can you not want that? And so there it is, zooming off to get on one of the bridges. But the reality of it is this. If you've ever been in San Francisco trying to get onto the bridge, there's two bridges. If you want to go to the Golden Gate Bridge, you go left. If you go to the Bay Bridge, you go right. And it looks like this all the way up to 11 o'clock at night. And maybe it lets up for a couple hours unless there's an accident or two, right? In which case it can go all night. But that's the reality of it. And all the bridges, they don't have that open thing. They're all packed. There's the Bay Bridge, there's the Golden Gate Bridge. And things have gotten really, really dense. And it's not just because of normal population increase. There's also some other forces at work because of this global changing thing. And it's this thing called urbanization, where over a period of time, the United Nations was able to plot a movement of people from rural areas into the city. And they can pretty much project where it's going to be. And you can see there's a good chunk, 20 to 30% of the population that is leaving the rural and headed to the city. And all of this has gotten some people thinking about, well, why do I need to own a car? The whole concept of car ownership and being an extension of you is kind of going by the wayside because they're facing the pressures of real life, of economy, and trying to deal with the vehicle. So they're looking to things like Uber and Lyft to provide services for transportation. And some enterprising companies have thought, well, we'll create some cars from Woody Allen Sleeper, and people will want to ride around in a gumdrop. But, people don't want to do that, so they try to make the cars look a little bit cooler. But the whole idea is you get rid of the driver. That'll solve the problem. We won't have drivers anymore. We'll have fleets of these self-driving vehicles that will somehow solve the traffic problem. Not quite sure how, but this is what's going on. There's a change in the industry, and even GM here with Chevy Bolt is doing that as well. There's multiple organizations chasing this concept of autonomous vehicles. And they're in play right now. I mean, they're on the streets in San Francisco, and they're trying these out. And in some countries, like here in Singapore, they're actually in use. And so in this period of time, cars have undergone a transformation between being devices or a commodity that was sold to us with the concept of an extension being of ourself to becoming a service. And that's a profound change, where the idea of something you couldn't do without has now just become a service. So how does this affect the world of computers? Let's examine that too with our perspective. Well, for all of us here, the spiritual beginning of our computer life, whether we worked on VAX 64s or whatever, was this. When this came out of the bag, that's what it was all about. We started from there. That was our day zero. And it proceeded forward, and each iteration got better and cooler, and it got faster and sometimes thinner, or the screen got better or had more power. Because, there was always some reason why you would want to update this, and it just iterated and iterated, and we've enjoyed being part of that journey. All of us have enjoyed the journey and followed along with Apple while they make this great hardware. But also at the same time that this was happening, another important thing was going on as well. Apple was iterating software, the system software, and they decided on a Unix-based structure that they were able to iterate through all these different hardware iterations to where they are today. And although you're starting to see more limitations on how the level of Unix-ness is exposed, and you might think, well, at some point they're not going to let me have access to that. But for now, basically what we have is still a concept of the Unix architecture on this wonderful hardware. All this is great, and it's all about computers, but there's something that Apple did that profoundly changed where they were going to go and what we were going to do and how our world would change. And it happened when they introduced this. All of a sudden, you had this real computer in your hands based on the Unix architecture or a modification of the Unix architecture that had worked on the other hardware. All of a sudden, you had this incredible device, and the idea and the phrase mobile computing became a reality. And this really changed how things worked for a lot of people. And along with its partner, the iPad, it became a staple of the Apple family. And it was always pictured as being compatible and partable and an extension of what you were doing. So you could create a reminder on one device that would then get sent over to the other, and we had all this wonderful interactivity. And that's what Apple really focused on, and they talked a lot about. But at the same time that they had divided up into this system of mobile and desktop, Apple was secretly working on another strategy that changed everything about who they are and what we do. And they exercised this strategy in plain sight. And what it was is they took the concept of the mobile environment based upon applications, and they created an enterprise platform. And in order to create an enterprise platform, they had to deliver certain things over time in this platform to the potential clients who were going to buy this. They had to start with like a new programming language. It was more modern. It could get rid of some of the cruft that they had to deal with before. They redid their IDE, their integrated development environment, so it would work with all of this, offering more features and easier use. Then they also put a big focus on security, not only for personal privacy, but because if you want to get to the enterprise, you have to offer them the security that they know that their data is going to be safe. And in addition, they put a big focus on mobile device management, because you have these devices in the enterprise, they need to be managed on a scale, that was unprecedented that they had before, and they had to really embrace this concept of mobile device management. And then, because we were in this app environment, you needed a way to distribute these apps securely so that people knew that they were getting an app that was safe, that they could use, and companies knew that their apps were going to their employees and it was distributed correctly. And finally, they needed robust documentation. So Apple worked on this over a period of time to deliver this. And this was the first step, because the second part of this desire to deliver an enterprise platform was partnerships. And so Apple picked strategic players that had been in business like IBM for 100 years, because Apple didn't have the relationships into organizations like these guys did. But these guys understood Apple's long-term vision, and they partnered with Apple because they believed in it. For example, General Electric. General Electric makes incredible hardware like turbines and engines and big things like that, and they have a development platform that's based on Apple stuff, so they can develop software and applications that talk to these machineries. Very powerful. Salesforce, one of the giants of enterprise, has a whole development platform for their developers that is based on Apple's tools, so that their developers can create apps using, the Apple IDE and our languages and everything, and the distribution. It's very important for them. In addition, IBM has brought cloud services and back-end things like Watson and real intelligence and power and connectivity to this whole environment. So there's 3 different companies right there that are really investing in Apple's vision. They're investing so much, they're betting their futures on it, and they're betting the futures of their customers. And that says that there must be something going on. If these companies are willing to expose, this is what we believe in, and we're going to put our customers on this, they better believe in it, and they better see a potential for it. Here's another, SAP. And this is one of the most interesting slides I've ever seen. It's kind of compact, but if you actually break it down, you'll see that the SAP is, just like the other companies, using Apple's architecture and platform to focus on delivering tools for their customers as well. And then you need companies to help implement, like Deloitte and Accenture, to come into your organization and implement these kind of things into your organization, and Apple partnered with them. Even Cisco, which is a networking company, has gotten into the game, and they figured out how to partner with Apple and deliver solutions as well, like this one in a Kansas school district where they were having problems with their Wi-Fi not being secure, and Cisco and Apple partnered, came in and solved the problem. So when Cisco's doing that, you know that they believe in it too as well. So you have an enterprise platform with the correct tools for creating. Security is foremost. Management is a priority. And then you have these partners that can go into the organizations that Apple didn't have a personal relationship with. So the question is then, who do you go to? Who are the customers for that? And here are some of the verticals. There's actually many more I could put on here, but I just fit 8 because that looks good, actually. So I want to go through some of these quickly, but a couple I'm going to spend a little bit more time on, just to give you an idea about the scope of what we're talking about and how this affects the way that we think about devices. Let's look at the aviation industry. Now, this is an industry that's constantly dealing with technology becoming obsolete, new technology coming in, adapting whole concept and changes in the way people travel and their needs and their expectations. And there's 3 areas in aviation that could really use these kind of devices. The first was in the cockpit, because, having access quickly to information and charts and maps and all that is essential And here you
United has always been a technological leader. We've seen a lot of innovation. We certainly look at the iPad as just one more step in the revolution of technology.
Captains are only as good as the information they have in front of them for the decisions that they make.
In the past, we'd have to pull a binder out, find the airport, and then find the actual approach code, clip it onto a chart holder somewhere, and then enter that data into the flight control computer on the aircraft.
We had to carry all those books, all those charts in a 45-pound flight bag. What we're able to do with the iPad is get rid of that big 45-pound bag.
What the pilots see is a content locker, an e-reader, and the Jeppesen mobile flight deck application. When the pilot arrives at the airport, we're able to connect, get current weather, get schedules, get all the gate information for the aircraft, and once you're en route, they have all the charts that you need. We've got all the surface maps, we'll have the departure procedures.
The iPad is extremely readable, and you can get to that particular chart or that particular piece of information quickly.
So that's really a useful tool. And airlines have been quick to adapt to that. A second area that these kind of devices are really important is in maintenance, because these planes are so technologically advanced, they're so complex. You need the way to get to the information that you need to access quickly so that you can get people off the ground and into the air. Here's another example.
The iPad application was developed specifically for United Airlines with input from technicians across all of UAL's hubs, says Nilsson Pan, Director of Technical Operations.
Basic information that we would usually sit at a computer and do maybe 40 or 50 different transactions to get that information now is on one click on the iPad itself. And all that information is right there for you. So it makes the technician's job so much more easier.
He says new technology also means information can be passed on in real time, so technicians are ready even before the aircraft arrives.
Makes total sense, right? If they use all the tools that are built into the Apple platform so they can communicate to each other through chatting or through messaging of some kind, they can search databases that are back in the airport so they don't have to leave the plane to go back to a computer. They have reservoirs of data that are on the devices themselves. So that's a really important use case. The third use case for aviation, of course, is with customers. Because, you have customers, you have problems. That's just the nature of things. And anything you can do to help resolve their problems quickly is valuable. And so here's what British Airways is saying about it.
In 2010, we introduced the mobile boarding pass. We decided we need to do something for our colleagues. Flight Info is the first app that we released using iOS. It's a list of all the operating flights for the day. Previously, colleagues would be given a printout, and as soon as they left the shift briefing, that piece of paper was out of date. So we decided the colleague needs to have the information about what's going on in the operation in their hand, so that when a customer speaks to them, they have the information there and then.
With the Flight Info app, we can actually see on the iPad the arrival schedule as well as the departure schedule. And it also gives you facility to track the other airports around the world that British Airways serve.
The next app was for the senior cabin crew member on the aircraft, and it replaced the paper passenger information list. So the PIL app was developed and deployed. It's been great because it means that the senior crew member can speak to the customer on a one-to-one basis.
Having that data at your fingertips in the moment means that you can interpret what needs to be done right there and then, and that really matters to a customer.
There are
really important, very useful use of that device. And the aviation industry has taken to this. So here's an example of where Apple really didn't have any penetration in this industry unless it was like the graphics department at a certain airline. And now they've become an essential cog in everybody's workflow. United bought 11,000 iPads. British Airways just bought 40,000 units. All these different airlines, this has now become the standard and the normal experience in this industry. So Apple, based upon this enterprise platform, has now gone into this industry and become an essential part of it. You really don't hear this a lot, but this is a reality, and it's happening across a lot of different industries. And one little anecdote about this as well is the other day, going through Dulles, found out this. This is pretty interesting. So all of a sudden they have iPads that act on facial recognition with the TSA. So you walk up to the iPad and it does everything and it scans and connects to the TSA database and lets you through. So it's even gotten into this part of the whole setup, the whole industry. It's just one aspect. Let's take a quick look at another one, like law enforcement. If there's anybody that you want to have access to information, it's a law enforcement officer that you're dealing with. And one of the nice things about the Apple enterprise platform is that you can have third-party software, like this software, where an officer can just tap a phrase and it will say the phrase in Spanish to the person they're dealing with. And you can, say things like, driver's license, or you can even have it do Miranda rights if you wanted to have to do that. But the idea is that the platform is very flexible. And because of that, New York City just recently implemented 36,000 Apple devices in their organization to where it's become an essential part of what they do. So it's no longer unusual to see, their finest holding on to a phone, because that's part of their process. It's a tool that they use. And that's just one other vertical. Another one is retail. And that makes a lot of sense because when you're dealing with customers, having data right there at hand is a very important thing. And it works well. And related to retail, you have like the food industry, where you can input orders on an iPad, or now we're even training customers to use the iPad to do their own ordering. Or you have a point of sale where you're using another iPad for the point of sale. And some restaurants have just gone totally iPad, where everything there is all iPad, self-serve, self-motivated. It's very interesting. And another related industry to that is the hospitality industry. And they're using mobile devices to interact with customers and to solve problems. When I was in Europe recently, I was in Sweden, and I stayed at this hotel called the Riverton that I normally stay at. And when I checked in, they had an iPad right there at the counter, and I just tapped a couple of things on that, and I was able to check in like 1/10 the time that it normally takes to do. And when I went to the restaurant to get my meal, I was handed an iPad mini that had my meal on it. And some hospitality and some hotel organizations have incorporated all of the features that are available on iOS to where you can now use your phone to unlock your room key as well, like here with the Marriott's design. And then when you get inside, there's an iPad there for you controlling all the aspects about the room, the temperature, your media consumption, messaging, all of that is right there. So again, all of that is part of an industry that Apple really didn't have an interaction with, but now it's become an essential part of it. Same with manufacturing. You have large spaces where you have to make decisions, communication, and have data at hand. It's perfect for working with mobile devices. I have a friend in San Francisco who builds skyscrapers. The guy builds skyscrapers for a living, and he and his team have mobile devices, and they can walk up to a beam and look at, okay, what kind of rivet's going to go in this thing at this point. They can look all of this up dynamically and use it. It's become essential. On every job site, you're going to see these things. And you have other industries like field services, delivering, warehouse management, that kind of stuff. Banking is also using this. And there's one more that I'd like to look at a little bit, and it's healthcare. And this is a big push by Apple. They're consciously making devices now that work with this. And having done my share of hospital stays, I can tell you I've used that same app, and it's really great that you can, get your blood drawn, and then 30 minutes later, you're looking on the app yourself, you're seeing the results, and you can tap it and go, okay, what does this mean? My levels of this are high, and this is how that gets treated. Here's my x-rays. I can communicate with my family and friends through that as well. And they even have creative uses like here at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, where if a mother gives birth via C-section and she's separated from the baby because she can't move, they can have an iPad there so that she can see the baby and communicate with it. And here's another example.
Geisinger made a strategic decision to use Apple and iOS devices across the hospital because it takes friction out of the care process and it improves the experience for patients.
The screws link the two pieces of bone back together. It's like bringing...
The mission was not to just continue the way healthcare had been practiced to date, but really to think about what's the next way we can take care of patients. So what we do is we give them iPads so they can be better connected, better engaged while they're in the hospital. With My Chart Bedside from Epic, they can check their labs in a way that's understandable for them, and we use it to teach patients about their chronic condition. Before an operating room procedure, particularly for children, we use iPads as distraction therapy, which reduces the amount of sedation and pain medication the patient has to receive. And we know that means that the patient recovers faster. In the neonatal intensive care unit, iPads connect in the mom who may not be physically present with the baby through FaceTime. This is a time when they're supposed to be bonding, and they're being pulled apart because the baby's sick. That interaction is huge for the baby and the parents.
Mama's here.
Our purpose is to take care of our patients. You can't do that unless you're supporting your doctors, your nurses, and other members of the staff. The iOS platform enables people to do the jobs they're supposed to be doing better.
So here's an entire industry that Apple wasn't traditionally involved in. It used to be all Windows organizations. And now, because of the usefulness and the construction of their enterprise platform and the quality of their hardware, they've been able to penetrate it to where it's become a standard in the way that things get done. So all of these different verticals, this means a big thing for Apple. And one of the things that it means is that it's selling a lot of devices. A tremendous amount of devices are going into this kind of application that we normally don't think about. It usually isn't advertised. Apple doesn't run commercials about it, but this is a huge section of the marketplace that is now dedicated to Apple. And it's like anything else, especially dealing with automation. Once you're involved in it, you're not going to give that up to go to something else, not unless that's broken and they, don't change it for you. As long as Apple stays up on it, people are going to like using these devices. But let's think about how this relates like to cars. There was a fundamental shift in the way that you thought about cars, that they went from commodity to services. Well, now we're really looking, instead of individual devices, we're looking at them as appliances. And that's a weird word to talk about appliances when you're thinking about computers, because personally, we've been so involved with these things over our lifetime that we've always had a special relationship with the things that we carry, or our laptop. And we wouldn't really think about it as an appliance. But really, in this type of situation, that's what they are. They're appliances. And that's a good thing, because it means that Apple has a future. They have a market that they can grow into that is just starting to expand, and it means more and more people will be comfortable with that. We'll still have our cool stuff. We'll still have cool stuff that we can make it ours, but it also means that there's a fundamental change going on right now about computers, that they're becoming appliances. So all of this means that Apple's selling a lot of these, a tremendous amount of these devices, and that means that they're going to be healthy, and this whole strategy is working. You're going to see more large-scale deployments, and you're going to see smaller-scale deployments. Say maybe I got 100 iPads I need to get out the door, 300 iPads, or 40 iPads, whatever. So then the challenge becomes, how do you deploy all these devices? And there are a lot of challenges to that. For example, some of these procedures for setting up these devices are time and labor intensive. Some processes that you have might be difficult to scale up to, en masse. And this is a really important one, and I can't overstate this one. You might be in a location where you don't have a strong network. You might be on an aircraft carrier in the Red Sea or something, or you might be in a school where the Wi-Fi is not really designed to be pushing gigabytes of book data around on it. And so it's important to think about how do you deal with setting up devices when the network is not really strong. And if you have a lot of content. Those that deal in education know that some of those books that they have in education with interactive movies and videos and things in them are actually quite big. And that can take a while if you have to download that over a network. So there need a different strategy for dealing with that. And lifecycle management, how to take care of the device easily over a period of time. And the human factor. This is another important thing that often gets overlooked. A lot of times in organizations, the person that's in charge of dealing with managing a device might have inherited that from somebody else. They might not be technically savvy about it. They might not be, one of us that are as educated and understands this kind of concept. So you have to have a solution that even they can use as well. And one of the things that seems to be common and accepted about dealing with mobile devices is people understand the concept of attachment. That when you plug something in and something happens, people are familiar with that and they understand it, and it's not complex procedure for them. They can deal with plugging something in. So the strategy is, how do you take advantage of that attachment thing? Last time I talked about Apple Configurator and Automator and how you could use the exec command from Configurator so that you could have access to this entire library of commands, and how you could create workflows. You would create a launch agent that would then run a shell command that would then run an Automator workflow. And I showed you, how to create the launch agent, and what it basically did was just run an attachment command upon attachment. You put the launch agent into the launch agents folder, and then we had a command file that basically had 2 bits of functionality. One is it got the data from the connected device and put it into an environment variable that's passed to the workflow, and then it executed the workflow. And that was basically the strategy behind that. And we had Automator workflows that used the Automator actions that came with Apple Configurator to perform all of this. And if you go back and watch the video, there's a lot of people that use that, and it works very well for them. But it involves, setting up and putting a lot of files in certain places on the computer, and involve you writing stuff and entering code. And so now all of that has changed, because now the Apple provisioning utility has really assumed all of that role and gotten rid of all of that. It does all of the sensing and attachment stuff automatically for you. You don't have to set anything up. And the Apple provisioning utility was created by the Apple Professional Services team. We're going to be showing it right after this talk over at the Regency, and you can see these things in action. And what it does, it can process, you can take a Mac, put the provisioning utility on this Mac, out of the box Mac. You can process up to 40 devices together simultaneously. The only setup you have is you create an Automator workflow. It has like this dashboard interface so you can see the status of each device as it's being processed. And it has no Wi-Fi requirement. You don't have to have this work over Wi-Fi. You can have a direct Ethernet or connection to the Mac, and the devices will get any information they need through that as well. And it has built-in content caching that is part of the Mac. And because of that, it makes the turnover time of actually delivering a complete formatted, refreshed device much faster than if you try to do it just through MDM and network alone. It gives you security so that if you don't want your files and information exposed over a network, you can just do it directly over the connection point. And it all happens on attachment. So the person that's triggering this just plugs a device into a cart, and that's it. Now let's look at content caching, because that's built into the Mac, and that's the real advantage of this whole thing, is the fact that you can transfer data so quickly over a cable instead of over a network. It's part of the sharing preference pane. If you click the content caching server there, it will automatically let anyone on that network know that there's a content caching server there. And if you choose, you can determine what kind of content that you want to cache. And if you select the options button, you can also determine how big the cache is going to be, where it is, and you can even limit the caching server to a specific zone of your network so that it's not bleeding out all over the place. And all of that is built into the operating system. You have that just natively available to you, and all of this takes advantage of this. Now, to create a workflow, it's standard Automator, and basically what it involves is you open up an Automator workflow window, you create a standard workflow, select the provisioning utility, and you can just select its actions and add them to the workflow. Each action in the workflow does its job and then passes the information to the next action, the process. And what it does is, as it goes along, it's processing the device. It passes the ECID number of the device as a way each action in the workflow. So, for example, here you would begin with the begin provisioning. When the device is attached, the Apple provisioning utility makes a note of it, keeps a little stub about that device. Even if the device self-disconnects and reconnects, the provisioning utility is aware of it and will handle that for you. It will also do logging, so you can go back and look at individual logs in the process. So this is the setup action. Then, in order to keep the USB bus from being overloaded, this stagger devices allows the different devices to be juggled so that not 10 or 15 devices are being processed at once. It's more like 5 or 6 devices are processed. So it keeps the devices from overloading the computer. Then here's this typical erase, a typical system update, prepare for automated enrollment as well. So then end provisioning. This would be a standard workflow. And when this runs, it automatically does that for you. Now, there are all these Automator actions available, so you can customize your workflow any way that you want. But if you need to add something specific, you can use the run shell script action and add in a custom bit of activity into your workflow using any of the standard shells or scripting languages. And you can have the library from the CFG util available to you as well. Here's an example of where a script, you would insert this in your workflow, and it will rename the device using the serial number of the device. That's the script right there. Here's one for removing a specific configuration profile, and here's one for doing a device health check. And if you want to really customize something, you can use the Dynamic Server API from Jamf Pro so that when the device is attached to the cart, it will automatically exchange an extension attribute of a pre-enrolled device, which will then put that in a certain smart group, which will then assign a bunch of configuration profiles to it. So you can have it so that the cart does nothing more than charge the device, but when it's plugged in, it becomes ready for a certain class, like math class. Move it to another cart, and it will automatically prepare itself for the science class. Or you move it, and you'll become prepared for the geography class. So one device using this Dynamic Server API can be used and formatted in a variety of ways by just attaching it to a cart. And here's the script for doing that. I want to thank my friend Tom for helping me out with this. It basically, you get the UUID for the device, then you put in the information about the particular account management account, and then you begin to process it. You get the extension attribute properties, more properties, then you make the XML that you put together that you're going to then finally send up to the Jamf server. And all of that works just upon attachment. So you can use Jamf involved in this. Let me show you some of the enterprise workflows I just talked about. The ones in green are involved with MDM. So here's like the police department workflow, and you can see that it also works with MDM, and at a certain point, it relies on MDM to install the volume purchase program applications. Here's one for a medical center device refresh. It also uses that. Here's one for a retail shop, and how you can do a health check on a device, and it also incorporates MDM. Reseller staging workflow that also uses MDM. And here's one for banking that uses MDM. So MDM can be part of your standard workflow. Now, here's what the Apple provisioning utility looks like. Let me give you a quick tour, and we're just about done. So there's a workflow button that you would select that would you choose your workflow. Then there's a status lights. It starts off blue, then it goes yellow when it's processing, green when it's completed. It can even let you know if there's a problem and you have to intercede. Then you have a progress amount, the serial number, any kind of feedback as it's going along, the name of the action that's being run, the device name and the other device information there, and the slot. So it can tell you what slots that you're going to be using for that device, and you can pick it out. And then to use it, you just simply choose the workflow that you created, and then when the devices are attached, they start connecting and getting processed. And this is what it looks like. You have like a dashboard effect that goes on. And if this particular device forgot to allow it to pair, and so I went back later and I just touched it and it rejoined the workflow. And meanwhile, the other one's processed. Everybody's being processed individually. You don't have to maintain a connection to any particular device. It's all handled for you here. And then as it goes along, it will add in the content across the caching server, across the cable, and it will also do any kind of updating and restoration that you need to do with the devices as well. And it only takes, generally, to process an iPad or a phone, it takes anywhere between 10 to 15 minutes. Have a stack that you need to process. This is a good way to do that. And when the devices are done, they show up green like this. And another interesting aspect of this is that this is all independent. Each one of these is independent. So if I need to pull a couple of those devices that are done and start using them, I can do that. I don't have to wait for the entire collection to proceed. I can start pulling devices anytime I want as long as they're done. So there's a lot of advantages to using this type of strategy. It's on attachment, understandable, very powerful, and it will perform for you. In addition, if you don't have a computer that you want to project, you could actually use AirPlay and project this to a TV set and have your dashboard available. So if you're at a retail installation and they need to just peek their head in and see which ones are available, this is a great solution for that as well. And that's the Apple provisioning utility. We're going to be showing it off next over at the Regency in just a couple minutes. So the whole concept behind mobile device automation is very valuable because it can take the grunt work away from having to do this kind of thing manually, and it gives you a consistent output and allows you to scale and do a lot of volume with this tool. So Bradford has just announced that they have a new cart that works with APU. It has Mac Mini integration, it has Mac Mini built into it, and it will work directly with the Apple provisioning utility to control the lights on the cart, and it will also does simultaneous charging. So it's a self-contained unit that you put there and then somebody can use. So I threw a lot at you today, and we've been talking about change and how it affects people and what it does. And normally, when there's a lot of change, it causes an unsettling thing. And I find that in my experience, the way to counter that is through friendship and involvement with other people. And the friends that you have here at Jamf are really important because through that, you come to understand that we can do together what we can't do alone. that we can accomplish whatever we need. And I thank you so much for letting me be here today with you, and come and visit me in the lab next door. Thanks, guys. Thank you.